So what I want to go over is, I'll introduce myself. I think most of you know me, but I'll do that anyway. And then I'm going to talk a little about org mode, org Babel, kind of a refresher, discuss what literate programming is. It might be new to some people, I'm not sure. And then sort of the big piece here is I'm going to go over a simple example of how you can use these things to do literate programming. And sort of when I'm done with that, I'm going to go over kind of, what we just saw, and then talk about my experiences with using org mode to do literate programming. Kind of where I've used it, some things I liked, some I don't. And yeah, that's basically the agenda. So by way of introduction, hi, I'm Josh. I'm a data engineer by day. I use Emacs as my primary code editor. I'm actually experimenting with using PyCharm, but Emacs is where I currently feel at home. I use org mode daily to stay organized. And relevant to this talk, I've used org mode to write literate programs. So again, what is org mode? I know a lot of you are already familiar, but for those of you that aren't, Emacs has sort of these different modes that you can apply to different buffers that you're editing that change the behavior of Emacs for that buffer, right? And the org mode package enables support for a file format called org files. They're sort of based on an older outline mode in Emacs, and they're really good for implementing to-do lists, sort of productivity workflows like getting things done, stuff like that. You can actually see, and I'll kind of explain what this is later on, but sort of on the side, you can see that I have an outline here with various bits and pieces that look suspiciously like this presentation. It has a lot of features. It has outlines. You can mark things as to-dos and various other states that might happen over the course of a task you're trying to do. It has a feature called capture templates where you can press some buttons and then type the thing and it'll automatically file it. It has an agenda mode, which I actually, strangely enough, don't use, but is sort of a nice alternative to something like, say, Google Calendar. But it has a lot of features that go beyond productivity. So for instance, it has fully featured text formatting, sort of on the order of what you would get out of something like Markdown. It supports links, hypertext, and otherwise, and it supports inline images. So, for example, if I go to this this one here, let's see, Control CXV. Let's see if it works. Yeah, it does. So you can actually render fully inline images in Emacs, and that's by Pet Pudgy, who, if the video is on, you can see that he's hanging out with me right now. And these features go way beyond productivity. You actually have full-on spreadsheets inside of org mode that use calc and list equations. You can do content exports and publishing, and this is sort of the partial punchline of this. This presentation and this org mode document are basically the same thing. In other words, I could take this org document that I have on the right, and I can generate this presentation with it. Finally, you can do code execution and literate programming using sort of a subset of org mode functionality, org Babel. Org is one of Emacs's like killer features. It's often a sort of a gateway drug into Emacs. It's the thing where people use Emacs because it has org mode and other things don't, and then that's when they get hooked, right? And yeah, I think most of the people in this meetup have probably like dabbled in it. But either way, what is so I've been talking about like org Babel and this idea of like code execution, and basically what that looks like is org supports these sort of inline blocks. There's different types, but the ones that are relevant to us are called source blocks. And org Babel adds these like really nice features around these blocks. And so, for example, you can execute a block of Emacs list with Control C, Control C, and you can edit it as well. And so, for example, I believe that if I go into this document, see that this is the code snippet, right? It says begin source. And And if I press Control C, oh, I could do nothing useful here because I scroll to the bottom. But if I'm in there, it'll execute it, and it'll put the results like underneath it. So that's pretty cool. And I could go and like edit it too. If I press Control C and the apostrophe, it would pop me into a nice little coded editor. It's pretty slick. Anyway, so what's literate programming? What are the origins of literate programming? Literate programming was invented by Don Knuth in the mid '80s. He is probably best known for having written LaTeX and Metafont and a bunch of stuff like that. Really, really smart guy, really big deal in the '80s. But he wanted to be able to write computer programs that could be sensibly read by humans, right? Sort of in other words, he wanted to be able to write what you might call a literate program that's also intended to be read, that's also sort of a human language like essay or a presentation, where it would read as though it was like meant for humans, but also like constitute a program. The first implementation of this was called Web, and it was oriented towards Haskell and RAWTag. Sort of, and sort of how does this work? Well, you write a document, it has human language, code, snippets, so on, and they're interspersed. And once you have that, you can use this tool that can, quote unquote, tangle the source code into something a computer can run. And this like tool or this toolkit would also have sort of a dual to that called weaving that could take this like document and turn it into, something pretty, right? Like this presentation. So what's the state of the art here? As you might imagine, Web is not really used anymore. Nobody writes Haskell. Most people use LaTeX. It was written in the '80s. It has been maintained, yada, yada. There's a tool called NoWeb that was highly influential, but it hasn't really been maintained that well. It's rarely used in 2020. It was pretty stale when I was like trying to use it in college like 10 years ago. Let's see, Haskell. Haskell is one of the few languages that has first-class support for this. So there's a dialect of Haskell called Literate Haskell. And this is a good moment to talk about Jupyter notebooks. So some of you may have used Jupyter. Sometimes they're referred to as literate programming. And there's tools that you can use to make them act more like what I would consider literate programming, such as NBDev, but they aren't really flexible enough to like truly rise to the occasion, in my opinion. They're not really there. Close but no cigar. But then there's org mode. It turns out that org mode has like fantastic support for literate programming. And this makes org really unusual. There aren't too many peers to this out there. All right, and so now I'm going to try to make this real. For this example, we're going to build a Node.js web server. You don't need to know Node.js. You don't need to know JavaScript you to really understand what you're seeing. This is just an example. And the point of this is to show what literate programming looks like, not to teach you how to use Express. So we're going to try to go fast. And yeah. Let's see. So how about we'll go through what this looks like in the presentation, and then I'll circle back and I'll show you kind of what it looks like in the actual org document. So first of all, if you're writing a Node project, you have to have a package.json that is used to manage the project. The top of it might look like this. Your app needs to expose a server object in this file, index.js. So you like set a main in there. We're going to use the GPL, of course, right? Like, what else, right? And our JavaScript files are going to need license headers. So using the NoWeb feature, which I'll show you in a minute, you write the license header once and include it in all the JavaScript files. It looks a little nasty here because I'm cramming the entire GPL on one slide without changing the font size. But nevertheless, so we're going to use Express. So that's a dependency inside of the package JSON. On one of the consequences of using literate programming. Normally, when you want to modify, this sort of package JSON kind of manifest, you use CLI commands. So if I wanted to install this package, normally I would run npm install express. But because that file doesn't necessarily exist, you might have to be a little more manual. Okay, but let's go to another server. So we got to crack it open. We got to add our license headers, and yes, it looks ugly, but like it's doing the right thing. Then you require the modules. Here's the nice explainer, right? It uses a module system that produces JavaScript. So it uses 6 modules. You got to return HTML, and so here's a function that'll return HTML. You have to create an Express app, which if you've done web development before, this might look familiar to you. This is defining a route. This is, setting the status in the header. If you've done HTTP stuff, this probably looks familiar, but if not, that's okay too. And then, you send your HTML. Use that function we defined earlier. You send a response, and that's cool. Finally, some bookkeeping, more stuff with the module system. Actually running it, you have to sort of import these things, and you have to connect the app to a web server, and then listen on port, right? Now let's tangle it, right? So if we go back to this, and this is what I was saying before, I can show you what this actually looks like. This is like the actual source code of what we were looking at before, right? And you can see there's all these source blocks. And the slide that we're on is way down here. Yeah, totally. So in order to tangle this, we can run Control-C, Control-V, T? Yeah, I think that's a typo. Yeah, and that tangled 15 code blocks. I don't know if you can see it at the bottom. Sort of a random sidebar. I am actually one of the people who uses Emacs. So this might look a little different from what you're used to. But now that it's tangled, I should be able to open up my terminal, which I closed like a jerk, waiting for it to open. Yeah, totally. Yeah, this is what happens when you buy a MacBook Air. They're like super slow and it sucks. Yeah. Waiting. Yeah, totally. So the point of this is that if I go into that directory, let's see, literate programming. I think, yeah. So in addition to some of the other pieces, there should be some stuff. Yeah. So if you look inside the Hello Express folder, we successfully made all of these files. And I can open one of them. So maybe index.js. That should open over here. And sure enough, like that presentation turned into this file amongst others, which is really cool. And sort of, in the same vein, interesting consequence of how running a cell works. It blocks Emacs. So this is like a cell that you could run, but you don't want to do it inside Emacs. So what we're going to do instead is run it in the actual terminal. So I can npm install, which I should have done earlier because installing things with npm takes a long time. And then when that's done, I should be able to start it. And it would run a web server. Yeah, and sort of to give a preview on this. Once it's running, you can curl it. And in fact, this one you can CC, right? I don't think I think we're doing okay on time. So I'm just gonna sit here and wait for this to install sure. But it's doing the right thing and it looks like it's, yeah, totally cool. So the code runs. It's running right now. And, sort of as I was saying, if I go to the org file, I can, don't want to do that. I can curl it, right? And that runs, and we get like our response back. So that works, right? Very, very cool. Right. But the other piece of it, so I talked about tangling. Now we're going to talk about weaving. How do you weave an org file? Well, this is just a feature that they call exporting. So what this looks like is if I press Control C, Control E, it'll pop this guy up. If you really have your stuff together, you can get this to do the whole LaTeX like pipeline. I had some minor issues, so I'm just going to generate the LaTeX file. So you can press L and then be in this menu. I don't know if this is stock or not. And that generates a .tex file, which I have open. I was prepared there. And that looks like this. And from here, I could like run a bunch of LaTeX commands and get this presentation to pop out. So that's kind of what this looks like at a high level. Sort of to review, we use these sort of source blocks that were configured to Tangler files. So again, if I go back to the actual talk, you can, we have all these like source files, right? And they tend to have sort of the format of them is that they'll say like begin source and end source. They'll have a file type. And then they'll have like a configuration for where to dump the tangling. So a lot of like source snippets that look kind of like that. The next piece is we used a special node feature to inline the license files. That looks like this. It's still like begin source, end source. But you end up using this like special syntax. Let's see if I can figure out where I left that. Let's see, brief sidebar on licensing. Yeah, so license headers. Yeah, so you can see like the thing that happened here is that I gave the cell a name and it's called license header. And then where I actually end up using it is like somewhere like over here, where this is sort of the no-web syntax, where you have these sort of double angle brackets in the name of the thing, and then if you set no-web.ts in the options, it'll do the right thing, which is a really nice way to avoid repetition. It's kind of a power feature, but it's pretty nice. It's worth noting that we included multiple languages, which is I was talking about Jupyter earlier. Jupyter notebooks cannot do this, but this is something that org can do casually. In this example, we had JavaScript, but we also had JSON, right? And sort of to review, we both tangled and weaved this org file into both running source code and this presentation, or at least like the LaTeX that turned into this presentation. So some of the things that I use this for, first of all, my Emacs setup and my Nextcloud instance all use this. I use Doom Emacs, as I mentioned. And this has like these config files that are Emacs list code that live in this doom.d directory. And those are all based on, those are all written in a literate org file. I also have a notebook that has a bunch of Nix configs and Terraform files, some Ansible playbooks that I'm using to manage a Nextcloud instance that I use to sync my org files across all my computers. That file also contains both a makefile and some PowerShell code. And one thing that's really nice about this is I can arrange the code by feature, not by like the individual file. I mean, I can include notes of what I was trying to accomplish, like why like something is inside of Terraform, right? And these at one point actually were like in one file. There's no reason these things have to be split up, except that I want to be able to use my Emacs config at work, but I don't want to deploy my Nextcloud instance at work. So I wanted those to live in different spots. I've also used this to manage some private. I have some code in my private mono repo for managing source code for some of the more challenging LeetCode problems I've encountered. This works pretty well because if I have a challenging problem, what I actually run on LeetCode is just the code. But sort of in my org file, I can include like the how and the why, and what was in my head when I was like trying to do this thing. And a program can also include alternate solutions to the same problem. And I do have like kind of an interesting hack for including other files inside of one of these, which is not something that's really natural, but I figured it out. I also wrote a project in PowerShell that runs the Emacs daemon in a system tray icon on Windows. This is not my Windows machine, otherwise I would show you. But it's pretty cool. I've given a talk on this before. Some interesting pieces here, unlike a lot of Emacs projects, is using a .NET language. And it tangles into a PowerShell module. One thing that's really nice is it's tested. So I can like have the code that I was working on, and then underneath it, like the tests that like assert that it's doing what I want it to do. And in this case, I don't know how many people have tried to run Emacs in Windows, but it's hairy, and not a lot is done for you. So this program actually doubles as documentation for how to run Emacs in Windows. And in fact, it's probably more useful for those purposes because it's not, a janky pile of PowerShell scripts. The document itself, I can export it into it after I'm done talking. So some things I like and things I don't. First of all, organizationally, they're quite good. A thing I really like about Literate programs is I can organize them the same way that things are organized in my brain, not necessarily the way that they should be organized in terms of source code. I really like that you can have multiple source code types about related concepts and that you can have them next to each other. And that know it feature, I think, is really slick because it means that you can take these sort of reusable snippets and you can define them in an appendix and then inline them wherever you need them. And that can really, really help with readability. And that license header is a really good example for that. I would also say that they're pretty readable. They can be informative. A Literate program could double as the documentation of what I'm trying to accomplish, what my thought processes are. And being able to run source blocks means that I can include directions on how to use the thing, and you can just kind of follow along. Like, if you've used a Jupyter notebook, you can do that in the same file as all of this, which is really neat. And newsflash, like Emacs is really good, right? Org itself is really nice because I like that you can collapse and expand sections. Like navigating org files in general is nice, and because it's Emacs, I can take advantage of all of the other modes that I use in Emacs and all the other features. And I can, if I don't like how something's behaving, I could always write some Lisp, right? But some things that maybe aren't so great. Editing is only as good as your config. So if there's a gap, like a thing you haven't quite figured out, it could be annoying. PowerShell, right? It doesn't have the best support in Emacs. And it was okay usually, but sometimes I find myself fighting the mode. And if memory serves, I don't have a way to CC PowerShell blocks. I've also found that breaking a code snippet into multiple blocks can confuse the editor. So you may have noticed that package JSON was spread across multiple blocks. But if you edit one of those blocks in isolation, it's not a valid JSON block. Right. So I've had to manually indent the code. I've dealt with, the mode thinking that there's syntax errors that go away when you tangle it, but, sort of zoomed in. Right. Many tools don't work. So we saw that you can't npmi things if you're doing this. Running a beautifier or a linter can be problematic sometimes. Many Emacs modes do include auto formatting and linting. So you're not entirely in trouble, but if you had a tool you wanted to run sort of externally and you didn't have Emacs support for it, you might be in some pain. Let's see what else we got here. We're almost done. Something that is like made me a little grouchy is that, and this is a little obscure, but you can't include multiple source types in the same file. So like, something you might do in Bash is like have an inline like awk snippet. So it'd be really cool if you could have the Bash parts use the Bash mode and the awk parts use the awk mode. But sort of this tiny little detail of how org like actually does it is that it aggregates the source codes by language type, and then it writes the languages out to the necessary files in alphabetical order, which means that it doesn't, like, if you do this sort of thing where you have bash, then awk, then bash, it writes all the awk first and then all the bash first, instead of in the order that you intended. Something to keep in mind. You can't get too clever. Finally, I have a couple of minor complaints about exporting and tangling, and you've seen a couple of these. So, when we went through this presentation, you definitely saw the GPL header show up multiple times, which I would have really liked that wasn't a thing. Tangling targets, they can be specified with one file document wide or a different document per block. But you can't really like something that'd be really cool is if you could specify that every block tangles to a file except for the ones that are otherwise specified, but it doesn't do that. And finally, exports can do includes sort of based on the headline, but tangling can't do that. So if you want to be able to have like includes from another file in yours, and you want to do this with tangling, what you have to do is export from org mode to org mode and then tangle the export. Which is really tricky, but it works, and I've done this, and it's not bad. Anyway, thanks for sitting through this talk. I am on GitHub, and I will include the link to this presentation when we're done. I'm also on Twitter, though it should be worth noting that I'm currently set to private. But if you friend me, I'll probably accept. And yeah, that's it. That's the show. Thanks for watching.
Thanks, Josh. Let's take some questions. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask?
I have a question.
Go for it.
I'd love to see, you mentioned some examples of how you used literate programming. Can you actually show the source code? Like for, I forgot what it was. You said some PowerShell scripts or JSON, that package.
Yeah.
I was just hoping to see the actual document that you created, the raw document.
Yeah, let's I think I have that.
Okay.
Let's get to sharing my screen again. And yeah, totally. So let's see. I'm gonna exit out of that. Yeah, something I mentioned before is so like this Mac, it's like the cheapest MacBook Air that they make, and I bought it when I was unemployed, so I like skimped a little bit, and I kind of regret it. But it is what it is. All right, so this is the actual project, and if I open
I'm also posting.
If I open,
yeah, it's not showing up yet.
I also posted in the chat. So if you want to take a look at that.
The project.
Oh, beautiful.
Tackle Demon, right? That's one that you want.
Yeah.
And so you can see the org file there and what that looks like. And yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I don't know if people. Yeah, I don't know. Like, that's a bummer. All right. Well, yeah. If you could see my screen, I happen to have it open.
Maybe you unshare and then reshare the screen. Maybe it'll pop up because it's kind of frozen on me. You could try that. Maybe that'll work.
Yeah, let's give that a shot.
Yeah, I'm also looking at it on GitHub. So
okay. Oh, yeah. You know what? I have an idea. I think, yeah, okay. So now if I allow, I'm sharing my screen. Now, can you see it? There's there's an org mode file open.
Let me try
Well,
something here.
all right. Well, yeah. Let me know if you can or can't see it. Oh, that sucks.
Sorry, Josh.
That's a bummer. But yeah. But yeah, you can check out the link. It's pretty neat. But yeah, that was cool because it was like you know, I was learning PowerShell and I guess, you know, you can see sort of in the file that it's almost more of like documentation for how you would run Emacs in Windows than it is like an actually useful thing for running Emacs in Windows.
Do you have your Terraform example, or you know, some of those examples?
So
I'd love to see
Terraform,
like a you know, introductory, but like, hey, this is what I use to remember my code.
So if if my video was doing what I wanted it to do, I would totally show you. But unfortunately, those pieces are private. Let's see. Simon says, I struggle with literate programming and building an org file for my Linux server build. Can I provide an example of how you can refer to the server as a variable and then use multiple source blocks to perform pseudo tasks to configure the server? Let's see. Let me try to think about. Let's see. So I feel like I'm missing a little bit of something here, but I think it. So you. Yeah. So I don't actually know the answer to this question, because I would say two things to this. One is that sort of the features around code execution and code tangling, they aren't always like well integrated. There tends to be differences between them, and so you know, if you were tangling, I would say, oh, use the no web thing, right? The no web thing is great. I don't know if that works for code execution. I would guess that it doesn't. So unfortunately, I don't have an example on deck for that.
We have another question from Douglas.
Actually, it wasn't a question.
It was a comment.
That was really helpful, Douglas. I don't think I would have figured that out on my own.
The other thing I might add in the no web is there's two ways that no web works. One is sort of just as this macro expansion, but you can also, by putting parentheses in it, treat it as a functional call. So you can have the no web execute the block and then insert the results into the.
Oh, that's sick.
So you can effectively do multi-language programming where, like you mentioned awk earlier, where an awk block will generate some string that then is then inserted into a variable.
That's cool. That's neat. Let's see. I'm not sure how to say your name. But would code navigation work in org mode literate programming? The answer is yes. At least I think the answer is yes, because a thing that I didn't really demonstrate very well is if you so like inside of a source block, you get like all of the standard features like syntax highlighting and so on and so forth. Like it feels like you're editing real code. And you know, sort of more to the point, if you are inside of a source block and you press Control-C and then apostrophe, it'll open up like a separate buffer with the code like inside of it, where you're just fully inside of that mode and you can edit it like just like you would any other like source code. And then there's a key press where you like save it to the source block. So you can 100% do, yeah, you could basically do the same sorts of things that you can there. If you're talking about more like something more of like what you would see in an IDE like PyCharm, like go to definition, that I don't know because it's not a feature that I tend to use inside of my IDEs. I would be mildly surprised if it was totally seamless. I feel like you would need to do that sort of navigation at the sort of the org mode level, but nevertheless. Let's see. Dexter asks, is there an interpreter for untangled org files? I'm not quite sure what... I don't know of like a thing where you can like point it to an org file and say, run this without tangling it. You could, however, write an ELIST program that tangles it in the background into like a temp directory and then runs the stuff. And then run that using Emacs in like batch mode. And that's probably the approach I would take. And in fact, if any of those other projects, like if sharing my screen wasn't an issue right now, I actually do that quite a bit. I've written little Emacs Lisp scripts to like tangle the stuff for me a couple of times. Let's see what else we got. Bob asks, what does NoWeb do and give you that org Babel doesn't? NoWeb itself, like proper NoWeb, it's this sort of like older, really janky and not maintained sort of implementation of this idea that was really influential. So you generally wouldn't use it today. But sort of what happened is that it was so influential that org mode took some of its features. And so there's some features inside of org mode and org Babel that refer to NoWeb, that are like NoWeb mode. And that's sort of that inclusion syntax I was showing earlier. And also that feature that was mentioned where you can like execute blocks and then inline the output of those blocks. So kind of a trick question because those are things that org Babel definitely gives you, but they're features that are influenced by NoWeb and are branded accordingly. Let's see. Dexter says, I've never used Emacs Lisp. Yeah, it's good. Sort of my review of Emacs Lisp is that it's not really common Lisp and it's not really Scheme. And so if you want it to be one of those things, you might be frustrated, but it is a Lisp. It's a fully featured one. And I enjoy writing it. And I do think it's really cool to have a text editor where you could program it the same way you would say that Node.js web server. I see a lot of similarities there. Web frameworks are what came to mind when I first started learning Emacs. But yeah, any other questions or?
Looks like not.
Maybe
All right,
one
go
quick
ahead.
question on, you mentioned
Sure.
Jupyter Notebooks right at the beginning, and I was wondering, maybe this is a little adjacent, but have you found any like Emacs? I know there are a couple of maybe some unmaintained Jupyter Notebooks in Emacs, but what's the state of that?
Yeah. So I will just be upfront and say that I have not tried to run a Jupyter Notebook in Emacs. However, so sort of the background here is that the canonical way to run a Jupyter Notebook is using Jupyter, or these days the new interface called Jupyter Lab, and that's always going to have the sort of that's sort of the reference implementation. So if you want to like know for sure that the Jupyter Notebook is going to work, like that's the safest thing to do. However, all the files are like just JSON, so literally anything can like run one of these if there's an implementation. And there is like a Jupyter Notebook mode for Emacs that I haven't tried, but I know it exists, and I believe there's a pretty solid talk about it on YouTube. It looks slick. Yeah, Ein. It's yeah. You got it, Jeff. It's called Ein, which I believe. I think it stands for something. But I found a video about it on YouTube and it looked really slick. It's just that when I use Jupyter, I tend to go with Jupyter Lab because it's the safest thing. But if you live inside of Emacs, like it's definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, I'm going to take a look at it. Thank you.